This is the 10 most prolific serial killers the world has ever seen. It's actually part of a 3-part series. If you want to see 15 through to 11, you need to check out on my channel, there is the top 15. The list is naturally ordered with the most prolific last, and obviously I don't go into tons of detail because we'd be here all day, but I do give the serial killer, the names, and a bit of history about that serial killer. Before we get on, let me just introduce myself on the channel. I'm Harley, this is All I'm Saying Is, and on this channel we talk about true crime, cold cases, and just some other bizarre, strange stories. It's all about stories. Drop a subscribe, please like this video, and please share it. Andrei Chikatilo was known as the Butcher of Roscoff, the Roscoff Ripper, and the Red Ripper. He was Ukraine's most prolific serial killer. He was born on the 16th of October 1936 in the Soviet Union, Ukrainian SSR to be precise. He sexually assaulted, murdered and mutilated at least 52 women between the years 1978 and 1990 in Russia, Ukraine and Uzbek. At the time of his birth, Ukraine was in a famine caused by forced collectivization of agriculture. Both his parents lived in a one-room hut and they didn't receive any wages for the labour. What they did actually receive was the right to cultivate the plot of land behind the hut. That were it. There you go, use that land. No wages, just get on with your work. Throughout his childhood, he'd been told he'd got an older brother called Stepan. But at the age of 4, some starving neighbours kidnapped and cannibalised him. However, we don't know that's true. In fact, we don't even know if it's true that he had a brother called Stepan. During the Second World War, Andrei's dad was conscripted to the Red Army, and during combat he was injured and taken prisoner. Between 1941 and 1944, Andrei witnessed the effects of a Nazi-occupied Ukraine. He did go on to describe the horrors, adding that he witnessed bombings, fires, shootings, from which his mom had to hide in the cellar, and ditches. If he weren't near the house and they couldn't get into the cellar, they had to hide in ditches. On one occasion, Andrei and his mom were forced to watch their hut being burnt down. While his dad were at war, Andrei and his mom were sharing a single bed. And I suppose in the height of World War II you could say, well, that's not actually that bad. But Andrei was a chronic bedwetter, and every time he wet the bed, his mom berated him and beat him. Every single time. In 1943, Andrei's mom gave birth to a little girl. She called her Tatiana. However, you might now be thinking that was 1943, but Andrei's dad went off to war in 1941. That was 2 years prior, so there was no way that this baby girl, Tatiana, could have been Andrei's dad's. And the truth of the matter is, during World War II, a lot of German soldiers were raping Ukrainian women. So it has been speculated a lot, and it's believed that Tatiana was actually fathered by a German soldier that raped his mom. And obviously, like we said, they're living in a one-bedroom hut. Well, not one-bedroom hut, a one-room hut. Basically a shed. So it is also speculated that he had to watch that happen. Or at least it happened in his presence. At school, Andrei was bullied. He was bullied because he's quite a skinny, short guy, and he had a lot of a timid nature. So he got bullied about this. And at home, him and his sister were constantly berated by the mom. So he didn't have a very peaceful, happy life as a child life. Tatiana later recalled that despite everything that the parents had been through, everything that the family had been through, the father was actually still a kind man, whereas the mother was harsh and unforgiving, especially towards the children. In his teens, Andrei was a model student and an ardent communist. He was the only student from his collective farm to finish the final year of school, and he actually graduated with quite good grades in 1954. At the onset of his puberty, he discovered that he had chronic impotence, and obviously he's already socially awkward, and he hadn't got much love for himself, so this just made it worse. He's now even more socially awkward, and he's got a lot of self-hate. And that's probably why he was very socially awkward with women. He was very shy in the company of women. His first crush was at the age of 17, and it was with a girl that he'd been doing the school newspaper with at school. So he knew her quite well, but he was still very, very nervous when he were around her, when he were in a company, and he was too nervous to ever ask her if he could date. And also, while he was 17, his little sister had a friend that she was playing with. She was 11-year-old, he's 17-year-old. He jumped on her and pinned her down and wrestled her to ground. And while he was doing so, she was struggling to get away, he ejaculated. Andrei performed compulsive military service between 1957 and 1960. Upon completing his service, he returned home to the village where he was born, and he lived with his parents, and he also helped out with the collective farming. It weren't too long after that he became acquainted with a young divorcee. Their relationship came to an end after 3 months. It weren't a long relationship really, and one of the main reasons it came to end is because they couldn't have sexual intercourse because of Andrei's impotence. And at the time that the relationship ended, she actually consulted some friends. She was being really innocent and just trying to help, and she asked some friends if they'd got any experience with it and how she could help him. But the word got out, and everyone found out that Andrei had impotence. In 1993, Andrei talked about this instance in an interview, and this is what he said.
Girls were going behind my back, whispering that I was impotent. I was so ashamed. I tried to hang myself. My mother and some young neighbors pulled me out of the noose. Well, I thought no one would want such a shamed man. So I had to run away from there, away from my homeland.
In 1963, Andrei Chikatilo got married. Now, the woman that he got married to was his sister's friend, and they'd only actually met 2 weeks prior. And it turns out that Andrei's sister and her boyfriend pretty much arranged this marriage. He did like her, but he says it were effectively an arranged marriage. He later explained that during that marriage, their sex life was minimal, and she did understand his impotence, and in order to conceive the baby, I'm going to spare you the details, but basically, she put the sperm in herself. It was sperm, and it weren't done the natural way, if you like. His wife gave birth to their daughter in 1965, and 4 years later, a son in 1969. In 1971, he became a teacher of the Russian language and literature. Andrei wasn't a very good teacher. He was very knowledgeable about the subjects that he taught, but he weren't able to maintain discipline, and he said that they took advantage of his modest nature. In May 1973, Andrei committed his first known sexual assault on a pupil. He swam towards a 15-year-old girl, he grabbed her breasts and genitals, and then as she struggled to get away from his grasp, he ejaculated. A few months later, he beat and sexually assaulted another teenage girl that he'd locked in his classroom. He was not disciplined for either of these occurrences, and he was not even disciplined for the amount of times that other teachers saw him fondling himself in the presence of students. One of his duties at the school was to make sure that students were present in the dormitories at an evening time. And on several occasions, they were known to enter the girls' dormitories in hopes of seeing them get undressed. By his own admission, in the mid-1970s, his desire to see underage without clothes had grown to an extent that he'd even started hanging around toilets. And he was frequently spying on girls as well. And there's a lot more detail about this, and it goes on, but that's not what this video is on about, so we're going to swiftly move on, because later on, the director of the school fired him, finally. But he did it wrong. He didn't just fire him. There were that many complaints. He brought him into his office and says, look, you either need to resign or I'm going to fire you. So he resigned. And obviously that's a massive detriment, because that means now he's resigned, he can go and join another school. And that's exactly what he did. He started another school in 1974, and he stayed there until cutbacks in teachers meant he got fired in September 1978. So then he went to another school, and he stayed there until March 1981, following several complaints of child molestation. And that was both sexes, by the way, boys and girls, and that's where his teaching career ended. On the 13th of September 1984, it was observed by 2 under police officers attempting to talk to young girls at a bus station. The detectives followed him through the city, and as they did, they saw him approach other women and tried to commit acts of frotteurism. Upon arriving in the city's central market, he was arrested. A search of his belongings revealed that he had a knife with a 20cm blade, that's just below 8 inches. He had several lengths of rope and a jar of Vaseline. In December 1978, Andrei Chikatilo committed his first documented murder. It was on the 22nd of December, and he'd lured a 9-year-old girl into a dilapidated hut which he'd previously bought secretly. No one had known that he'd bought this hut, and he lured her in, and at that point he tried to rape her, but obviously he's got impotence, so he couldn't get an erection. And when this girl tried to struggle, he choked her and stabbed her 3 times in the abdomen. And obviously while he's stabbing this girl, as we know from him in past, it doesn't take a lot for this guy to ejaculate. He did do just that. Andrei Chikatilo was tried for 53 murders. Of them 53, 21 were boys aged between 7 and 16-year-old, and the other 32 were females aged between 9 and 44-year-old. Andrei Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders, but it was only proven that he'd killed 52. On the 14th of February 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed by a single shot from a gun behind the right ear. He was then buried in an unmarked grave. He was Ukraine's most prolific serial killer and the world's 10th most prolific serial killer. Samuel Little, also known as Samuel Dowell, and also known as the choke and stroke killer. He is the most prolific serial killer in US history. Born on the 2nd of June 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia, United States, he moved to Lorain in Ohio, United States, with his family, and he was brought up pretty much by his grandmother. At school, it said that he had problems with discipline and achievement, and by his own account, he started having fantasies, sexual fantasies, about strangling women when he was just a child. And apparently, according to him, these fantasies first started when he saw his kindergarten teacher stroking her neck. I don't know if she were doing that or whatnot, but that's when these fantasies apparently started. Then, as a teenager, he started collecting true crime magazines that depicted women being strangled. Or choked. Women being choked. At 16-year-old in 1956, he was convicted of breaking and entering into a property. He was held in an institution for juvenile offenders. In the late 1960s, he moved to Florida to live with his mom, and while he was there, he worked at various times as a cemetery worker and as an ambulance attendant. At that point, he began to travel more frequently and have quite a lot more run-ins with the law. By 1975, he'd been arrested 26 times in 11 states for his offences including driving under the influence, fraud, shoplifting, solicitation, armed robbery, aggravated assault, attacks on government officials, and rape. In 1982, Samuel was arrested in Mississippi and charged with the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose LaPree. Not sure what month he was arrested, but she went missing in September. A grand jury declined to indict him. However, while he was under investigation, he was extradited to Florida and tried for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount. Her body had also been found in September. He was acquitted in January 1984 and then he moved to California. In October 1984, he was arrested for kidnapping, beating and strangling 22-year-old Lori Barros. However, she did survive. 1 month later, he was found by the police in the backseat of his car with an unconscious woman. She'd also been beaten and strangled, and it was in the same location as the attempted murder of Barros. For both crimes, he served 2.5 years in prison. Upon his release in 1987, he immediately moved to Los Angeles and committed at least 10 more murders. Samuel Little was arrested on the 5th of September 2012 at an homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. He was extradited to California to face narcotics charges, and while he was there, the police used DNA testing to establish that he'd murdered 3 individual women. 3 separate women on 3 different occasions. All 3 women had been found dead on the streets of Los Angeles. So then he was extradited again, this time he was extradited to Los Angeles, and he was charged on the 7th of January 2013. Samuel Little claims to have strangled to death 93 women between the years 1970 and 2005. Though many of his murders, the victims' deaths, had been ruled as accidental deaths or overdoses. Samuel Little has been proven to have killed 60 women by strangulation. However, he claims that he's killed 93 women by strangulation. He was sentenced to 4 life sentences in prison with no possibility of parole. He later went on to die in prison on the 30th of December 2020 at the age of 80. He is America's most prolific serial killer, and he's the world's 9th most prolific serial killer. Yang Xinhai is known as the Monster Killer. He's China's most prolific serial killer. Born on the 29th of July 1968, he said that his family was the poorest in their village. He was the youngest of 4 children, and he said that he was very clever and introverted. In 1985, he dropped out of school, and he was only aged 17, but he decided he weren't going home. Instead, he travelled around China doing labouring work. In 1988 and 1991, he was sent to a labouring camp for theft. In 1986, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for an attempted rape. All of Yang's killings took place between 1999 and 2003. And the way he killed his victims is he'd enter into their homes during night and kill all the occupants. He used axes, hammers, shovels, and sometimes he killed the entire family. Strangely, each time he wore new clothes and large shoes. In October 2002, he killed a father and a 6-year-old daughter with a shovel. Then he raped a pregnant woman, and she survived, but she did have serious head injuries. Yang was detained on the 3rd of November 2003 because police noticed he was acting a bit suspicious, and they were just doing like a routine police inspection of an entertainment venue. Police took him into questioning, and they later realised that he was wanted for murder in 4 different provinces. Yang was sentenced to death on the 1st of February 2004. He was executed on the 14th of February 2004, and he was killed by firing squad. Yang Xinhai was found guilty of killing 67 people. It's not thought that he killed anybody else, and he is China's most prolific serial killer, and he's the 8th most prolific serial killer in the entire world. Kampatimar Shankariya is India's most prolific serial killer, but there's not very much known about him. He was born in Jaipur, Rajasthan in 1952, and he was arrested at the age of 26. He confessed that he'd killed at least 70 people just for his pleasure in the years between 1997 and 1998. That's 70 murders for his pleasure in the space of less than 2 years. He killed his victims by hitting them just below the ear on the neck. He was convicted on early 1979, and he was hanged on the 16th of May 1979. He did repent, and his last words before being hanged was,
"I have murdered in vain. Nobody should become like me."
Kampatimar Shankariya was proven to have killed 70 people. It's not known whether he killed any more. He's India's most prolific serial killer, and he's the world's 7th most prolific killer. Pedro Rodrigues Filho, also known as Pedrino Matador, was born on the 17th of July 1954. He was born on a farm, and when he was born, his skull had been bruised, his head had been bruised, because while his mum was pregnant, his mum and dad had an argument, and his dad had kicked her in the stomach. Rodrigues claims that his first urge to kill was just at the age of 13-year-old. He was in a fight with his older cousin, and he pushed him towards a sugarcane press, and it did almost kill him. Then at the age of 14, he stole his granddad's shotgun, went down to town, and shot the deputy mayor. He shot him in front of the city hall, and the reason for doing so is he'd recently fired his dad for theft. His dad had been accused of stealing food from the school's kitchen, and his dad claimed he didn't do it, so Rodrigues went down, he shot the deputy mayor that had fired him, and then he went and killed the security guard as well, because he believed that it was him that was stealing the food. Rodrigues took refuge in Sao Paulo. While he was there, he started robbing drug dens, and he started killing traffickers. Not long after, he met Maria Olympia. She'd been nicknamed Botina, and they began living together. Rodrigues took on the duties of the deceased, and he was soon forced to eliminate some rivals, and he killed 3 ex-cronies. Botina became pregnant, but it weren't long after that she was killed by a rival gang. At this time, still quite young and in fact underage, he escaped. He was arrested for the first time on the 23rd of May 1973, and he went on to remain in prison most of his adult life. Police records show that they were once transporting him and another prisoner in the same vehicle. Both prisoners were handcuffed, but when they got to where they were going, the police opened the doors. The other guy that were travelling with were dead. And Rodrigues says he did this because the guy was a rapist and it was the right thing to do. He was sentenced to 126 years in prison, but he was released in 2003. Because at the time, Brazilian law prohibited anyone to be behind bars for 30 years consecutive, so that has actually changed, by the way, it's now 40. And interestingly, 47 of his victims were actually killed in prison. Pedro Rodrigues was officially sentenced for the murder of 71 people. However, he claims to have killed over 100. In total, he served 42 years in prison, and he was released in 2018. He is the world's 6th most prolific serial killer. And that's it for today's episode. If you want to see 15 through to 11, make sure you check that out. I should link it anytime about now, up here, or maybe it's down here. Check them out. I should also link the other one as well. So let's do 1 to 5 here, obviously not yet, and 11 to 14 here. Please do subscribe to my channel, thumbs up and share it, it all helps a lot. But mainly, thank you for watching. Bye.